Great, thank you. So hello everyone, my name is Jasmine. So I just graduated college last year, so do not have like a lot to present. So today I'll talk mostly about my undergrad experience and appreciate any advice or feedback. So I'm currently a first year MHS student in the epidemiology and in the clinical trials and evidence synthesis track. I graduated last year from University of California, San Diego with a Bachelor of Science in Public Health with a minor in economics. As a public health major, we took courses such as epidemiology, biostatistics, health policy, health behavior, outbreak investigations, and health economics, etc. So in our final year, we also had to do a capstone project to examine physical activity barriers before and during the pandemic. That was our topic of choice. That is also the time when California had its stay-at-home orders as well. So this is the poster that we did. So for most of our participants, we reported decreased physical activity and accessibility was reported being the greatest barrier. This being my first research project as an undergrad, so we did not control for any confounding or develop any statistical models like what should have been done, but maybe I can go back and do that sometime. So during the course of undergrad, I also had a few other experiences where I did some wet lab work at the Salk Institute of the Biological Sciences, the Bush Lab, where the goal is to explore different genes for improving roots growth. Since roots are very critical for obtaining water and nutrients from the soil, they play a very important role in agricultural systems, basically directly affecting crops and food security. So using GWAS or other system genetics approaches, different projects were conducted to understand basically how roots grow in certain environments and how to make them grow deeper or more spread out in the soil. So then I was also a student RA during the summer at the University of Hong Kong School of Public Health, mainly focusing on health policy research. So the project goal was to observe the impact of alcohol tax policy change on consumption and health outcomes. So I assisted with a bit of literature review, looking into variables such as gender, age, education level, marital status, occupation, etc. And then I was also an undergrad TA for the EPI course, where I helped with lab discussions and hold office hours to help fellow students on course material. I assisted with course preparation alongside with the professor and the lead TA. So this is when I found my interest in pursuing EPI. It was very fun for me to help students work through their labs and then apply what they learned in lectures and class onto examples and case studies. So also in my final year and also during COVID, I also worked at the UCSD NAFLD Research Center. NAFLD stands for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And the goal of some of the projects is to investigate the prevalence of NAFLD and advanced liver fibrosis among type 2 diabetes patients, but we also did some other projects involving alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we did a prospective cohort study to estimate prevalence of advanced fibrosis among overweight or obese adults in San Diego. So since San Diego is a very diverse population with 30% Hispanic, the study also aimed to investigate factors that lead to racial disparities in the Hispanic communities. And then a phase 1 and phase 3 clinical trial also were recruiting patients from that cohort study as well. So in this position, I assisted with data entry, patient data collection, and helping with the logistic of running a trial, like developing recruitment milestones for the project. This is also where I gained a little bit of exposure and then interest in clinical trials and decided to pursue this track. And then moving on to some of the current work that I'm doing, I currently work at the Center for Clinical Trials, assisting with the ADVISE and MERIT trial. So the ADVISE is the multi-center comparative effectiveness trial comparing two interventions for uveitis, and then MERIT trial is comparing efficacy and safety of 3 different interventions for the treatment of uveitic macular edema. So in this position, I basically assist with data entry, data auditing for these trials. Since I work closely with the data system, this is where I learn a lot hands-on about clinical data management. And then besides from that, I also help with the NAC trial from the Wilmer Eye Institute. The NAC trial is the phase 3 multi-center randomized placebo-controlled trial in retinitis pigmentosa. So NAC itself is a planned antioxidant, and then from preclinical and phase 1 studies, NAC show clinical evidence that it promotes cone survival and function. And the efficacy objective for this trial is to delay RP progression. And then this trial recently got funded by the NDI, and then we're in the planning stages of the trial. So I sit in meetings helping with the trial logistics, such as like planning for drug distribution, site coordination, forms drafting, etc. It has been a very interesting experience for me, especially when there's a lot of international collaboration going on. Like, for example, you had to take into a lot of the international pharmaceutical laws into account. That was a very interesting experience for me. And then, so moving forward, I'll be starting my thesis research next term with Dr. Irvin and Dr. Kong. So the research question of interest is that the 2-year incidence of cataract and its associated risk factors using prospective data from ProgStar. So ProgStar is the natural history of progression of atrophy secondary to Stargardt disease study. So basically my thesis will be a risk factor analysis of cataract among Stargardt patients, where I will potentially look into demographics like age, sex, behavioral and lifestyle factors like vitamin A supplementation, smoking, and even possibly refractive error. That's my thesis plan. Not sure if the slides are advancing. Right.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So my future goals will be to develop more of my analytical skills, especially with software programs, and then getting more involved with clinical trial data management and analysts. So that's all I have for today, and thank you.
Great, thank you. Good to get to know what your background is and everything. You presented a lot of the research projects that you've done, but I'm curious as to what the outcomes were for some of those projects. Do you have them, or do you know what they might be?
They're still ongoing for a lot of the projects that for the trials. They're all I'm usually getting involved with the early phases, so I'm pretty sure they're still going on. Yeah, that's a pity. I want to see the results too.
Yeah, and the poster that you said you didn't control for any covariates, are there some that you were considering? Like, if you could go back and do it again, what would you control for?
Let me go back to. I would still control for like the number of gyms that are available on campus, and then where they live that might be barriers to access even before COVID too, something like that. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for Jasmine?
Yeah, I have a question. So I think our trials work and working in our coordinating centers is there's a lot of different aspects to this. And I wonder what kind of aspects so far you enjoy most.
For the projects that I worked on?
Yeah, for example, I mean, there's data management, there's analysis, there is a lot of, there's literature research, there is, different things, there's logistics, coordination and all that.
Yeah, I think my thesis advisor asked me the same thing too, but honestly, but I think it's very interesting that to work in all the phases of the trial. I'm still deciding what I really am interested about. Sometimes I sit in meetings and find that, wow, it's a lot of international collaboration going on, and I find it very fascinating. And then when I work with the data system, thinking that, oh, I have to take a lot of like wording and then how you name the variables into account, that very interesting as well. So right now I'm still figuring out which one. Yeah.
Cool.
Any other things for Jasmine? Great,
Maybe
thanks.
maybe just out, I'm sorry, maybe out of curiosity, the thing in Hong Kong that you did with the alcohol tax. Do you have results there? I
That's
heard it
what
was.
I wanted to know about.
So what I did during summer was the professor that I was working with had like a general idea of what might he has planned for the project. So I'm not sure if they did like the actual research or not, because I helped with the early literature review. But it was a alcohol tax policy change back in 2008. So it was like
Very cool.
Very cool.
Thank you, Jasmine.
thank you.
Morgan, whenever you're ready. Thanks.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Morgan Mazars, and just like Jasmine, I'm also a first-year MHS student in the epidemiology department, also clinical trials, obviously. And I don't have that much experience as well. I graduated in May of 2021. So, okay. So to start, I'm just going to go through an outline. So I'm going to go through some of my background, my prior experience, and then the current research that I'm doing. So background, a little bit about me. So I earned my bachelor's degree in exercise science from Monmouth University in May of 2021. My original plan for the first couple of years of being an undergrad was I thought I wanted to go to school, go to my master's or my doctorate in physical therapy. So that constituted a lot of my time towards shadowing hours, which was a good experience. Obviously, it helped me decide that I didn't want to do that, which is okay. So I had the opportunity to work for Pfizer as an intern in the summer of 2020 and during COVID. So that was completely remote, but it was still like probably one of my greatest experiences. So within the company, I got to network within a lot of different departments, and I got to speak with many epidemiologists, and that kind of was where my interest was gained for epi. So after that experience, I also did an academic academic credit experience through Pfizer again in the fall of 2020. So that started in September and went through December of 2020. And that was more focused on COVID research and external COVID research. So not within the company, to kind of look at if they were missing something externally. And I'm also going to be talking about what I'm currently doing, which is working as a research interviewer for a kidney transplant study through Northwell Health. So my first experience was Pfizer, and my title was Sourcing Operations Coordinator. But essentially, I worked with investigator payments, and I looked at many different clinical trials, and I worked with CROs. So CROs are contract research organizations, and they essentially help with executing clinical trials. So this included companies like Icon, Syneos, and Parexel. And essentially, I looked at those clinical the CRO contracts, and I looked at missing data that was within each contract and pretty much reporting that. And even going further, I would look into different participants and how they maybe weren't getting paid, or maybe the system didn't process things. So it was more of the business side, but definitely helpful and an important part of the clinical trial process. And then my next experience was the COVID-19 research extern. So this, oh wait, I think I may have, yeah, I skipped a slide. Okay. Yeah, so the main goals here. So essentially I did research. So I researched site-specific COVID hospitalizations, so locally, by state, and by country, to provide Pfizer with potential clinical trial sites. So I compared protocols for different regions and states, and I essentially concluded which approaches were most in line with the established standards. And then my third goal was to analyze availability and the transparency of data statewide for the public, organizations, and to make this information available to empower other decision makers. So to start, I looked at COVID research that was by each state. So every single state had COVID-19 data, and it was very general. So this included like the confirmed and probable total cases, hospitalizations. So more specifically looking at ever and current ICU patients, people who were ever and currently hospitalized in general, and then same thing with the ventilators. And then every single state had outcomes based on if people were covered, and then the total deaths. So my methods were to start researching individual hospitals for each state. So here's an example of Massachusetts, and this was one of the states that actually had hospital-specific data for COVID. So I highlighted 4 over here that were just some of the largest ones that had the most beds, because I figured that they would have the most information available that I could use. So yes, like I said, I searched the most populated hospitals for site-specific COVID-19 data. So this was promising at first, because this was one of the first states that I found. Oh, it's lagging. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the data was categorized by specific hospitals. So there were only 5 states that had hospital-specific data at the time. So this is when I first started. So this was probably in September and October. And this was Alabama, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Montana, and Wyoming. And then there were 14 states that had data by their zip code. And then the rest of the 31 states only had data by county. And then there was an exception, state of California, which I'll talk about a little bit further. So going back to Massachusetts, like I said before, they had hospital-specific COVID data. So this is just an example of what I was looking at. So that gives every single hospital. So this was page 1 of 3. Talks about the hospital county it's within, and then it gave information on hospitalized total COVID patients, including them in ICU, and also suspected and confirmed ICU COVID patients. So moving on to data that was found just by their zip code, there were 14 states. So this gave information on like the number of patients who are currently hospitalized for COVID and who were currently in the ICU for COVID. So here's an example of a state that did that. So that this is Maine, and essentially they have a map here given every single zip code area, and then the number of cases color coded on the right. So obviously zip code data is not as helpful, because if you're trying to conduct clinical trials, you want to have a specific site in mind, which is why I was more curious and interested in finding hospital data, but this is still important. And then here's just another example. This was Florida, also another state that had their data by zip code. And then the third way that the data was categorized was by county. So every single state within the United States, they had county specific data, but that wasn't very specific, which, like I said before, it's not super helpful for identifying hospitals that could be used for COVID trials. And then California was an exception state, just in the sense that they had county specific data, but they had certain hot spots. So if you can see on the upper right of over here, it was weird. I don't know why they did it like this, but they had hotspots where at that moment in time, they had influx of cases. So I just thought that was interesting. I don't know why they chose to do their information like that, but I thought it was notable and something that I should definitely speak on. So regarding the CDC and how information was submitted, so the data was reported to the state and jurisdictional health departments. So that was in accordance with the CARES Act. And then each state, the data was sourced from either the data submitted directly to the state health department through COVID-19 electronic laboratory reporting, or a combination of commercial, public health, and in-house hospital laboratories. So methods of submission. So essentially every single week, hospitals would have to send in their information about COVID. So they were required data elements related to laboratory data was reporting to the HHS, and it could be reported to 3 different areas. So the first one was directly to the state or local public health or public departments. So that's required by the state and local law. And then the second option was to the state or local public health departments through a centralized platform such as the AIMS platform, so the Association of Public Health Laboratories. And then the third was through a state or regional health information exchange to the appropriate state or local public health department, which was then sent to the CDC by the state. So if every single hospital had to report this data, why was it not publicly available? I thought I was missing something, because why were only 5 states showing hospital specific COVID-19 data? So towards the end of my research, this was about in end of November, I was like, did I miss something? So I went back to where I started, which was the CDC. And basically I went to the CARES Act, and it led me to a footnote on healthdata.gov, which led to a really awesome data set, which helped me in the end. So this is what it led to. Basically, COVID-19 reported patient impact and hospital capacity by facility. So this came out, I don't know if you can see on the bottom, it says November 26, 2020. So the entire, like for 2 months, I was looking for this data set, and it didn't come out until towards the end. But yes, I finally found it, and it was awesome. So it was crazy. It looked very busy. But essentially there was one row per week per hospital. So every single week the data would be updated, and there were over 87,000 rows of data in total. So there were 93 columns of data. So some of the most important ones that I looked at were the hospital names, the address, the hospital subtype, the total beds for 7-day average, because this information was submitted every week. So they would do a 7-day average. They had total confirmed adult COVID patients hospitalized for 7-day average. They also had the staffed ICU adult patients confirmed and suspected for COVID, which was another 7-day average. And then the last one that was really important was the total patients hospitalized for confirmed influenza and COVID for a 7-day coverage. So this was very important. I'm glad that I found this towards the end of my research, because it gave a lot of good information and site-specific information that could be used for clinical trials. And they also had a data dictionary, which is very relevant right now. I'm taking a data management course, and there were, for each column of data, there was over 97 or 93, I think I said, yeah, 93 columns of data. So it was really important to keep this data dictionary to keep track of all the different variables and things of that sort and the terminology that they used. So with that gigantic data set, I basically created a couple graphs. So this was from November 2020, but essentially I looked at the top 20 hospitals with the highest prevalence, and you can see they're coded by color for what state they fall in. And yeah, so they were just listed here. And then I also created another visual. So with the top 20 hospitals with the highest ICU prevalence. So once again, they're color coded, hospital name is on the bottom, and then the states are color coded over here on the side. So that was my one of my main projects at Pfizer. And now moving on to what I'm currently doing. So I'm working for Northwell Health. I'm an interviewer for the STEPS trial. So basically STEP stands for System Interventions to Achieve Early and Equitable Transplant Studies. So this is for people who qualify for kidney transplants. So just some background on kidney disease. So over 40 million people have chronic kidney disease in just the United States. So about 768,000 have treated end-stage renal disease, or ESRD. So there are stark ethnic and racial disparities, which is a main concern, and we're looking at that in this study. So the goals of this study are to achieve key steps toward kidney transplant early and equitably. So we want to improve the current care, but we want to reach out to patients in a new way. So this includes a social worker and a transplant coordinator, and we want to talk to them, bring them in, and then walk through the steps to complete transplant referral and evaluation process. So the main question here is, does the new social worker and transplant team help patients complete their transplant evaluations and eventually get transplants faster and more often when compared to the usual way? So this trial, who is being recruited? So it's a randomized comparative effectiveness trial, and there are about 1,150 patients from 3 different centers. So the Duke Health, Geisinger Health, and then the UMMC. And then patients are aged, our participants are aged 18 to 74 years old. And we're looking at the eGFR, which is basically a filtration rate for your kidneys. And if that number is less than 30 or kidney failure risk is greater than 10% in 2 years, then they would qualify to be in this study. So here's just kind of a visual of what is going on. So the first step is to assess for the STEP surveillance registry and the eligibility. So like I said before, the eGFR has to be less than 30, and then or kidney failure risk has to be greater than 10% in 2 years. And then clinical practice advisories issued in electronic health record system. So then patients are randomized into either intervention or an augmented usual care. So intervention includes a social worker outreach, education, transplant coordinator, and then navigation with your EFR if it falls below, if it falls below less than 20. So then if you're treated, if you're in the arm of augmented usual care, you still get the same survey done every 6 months. You just aren't getting the intervention. So here's an important part is that, recruitment and randomization. So the follow-up is over 18 months. So the primary outcomes are transplant evaluation, initiation, and completion disparities. So primary outcomes here are completion of transplant evaluation, and it's also measuring referrals to transplant center for a kidney transplant. And then also waiting list of patients on the kidney transplant deceased donor list. So my responsibilities within this role, I'm screening potential participants for the recruitment, and I am obtaining oral consent for these eligible persons. So I'm conducting baseline telephone interviews, and I'm following up with them every 6 months for up to 18 months. And I'm utilizing REDCap system for data entry. I have never used this before, but I've learned about it in my clinical trials data management class, and I'm also using it for this job. And then I'm also submitting payments for each participant who completes this survey. And here's just an overview of the screening, recruitment, and follow-up of the enrolled patients. So all participants, they are on a kidney transplant registry. So that's how we're identifying them in the first place. And then they're getting a letter mailed to them to see if they would want to be included in the study. So they have a 10-day opt-in or opt-out period. And essentially they get screened for enrollment by the research interviewer, which is my job. And then either they are ineligible or they refuse, so then it stops there, or they consent, and then I begin the baseline telephone questionnaire. So then after that, they get randomized, and then my job moving forward is to reach out to them 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months after. This study, I want to also say, has not yet started. So this is all very new to me. I don't know too much that's going on. I've had a couple training sessions for it, but I'm not starting until March 29th. So, and that's pretty much it. So thank you. I'll take questions, and any advice is welcome as well.
Thanks, Morgan. That was great.
Thank you.
Any questions to start off?
Yeah, hey, very interesting. The STEPS trial. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the intervention and this augmented usual care group? Maybe perhaps I missed that difference.
Oh yeah, so I'm just gonna go back a little bit. So the augmented usual care is basically they don't get, I guess, a social worker, and they don't get the talk education or a transplant coordinator. They're just continuing whatever they're doing for their kidney disease and how they want to do it. So they're the basic, I guess, let me go back to my other slide. The goal, oh, here we go, perfect. I guess they want to see if having a social worker and a transplantation team makes a difference in the usual care that they would receive if we didn't have this. So
okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
I think Karen raised her hand. Go ahead.
I did, yeah. Thanks, very interesting. For this STEPS trial, could you talk about the masking or blinding? So in particular, I was curious when you showed the last flow chart, if you as the interviewer are going to be masked as to what group the participants have been randomized to.
So in REDCap, actually, I went through a trial run today, and I do get to see the person and like where they go, but I don't get to choose it. I just get to see what intervention group they go to, and then the system does it itself. So,
right. But when you're interviewing them, you will then know which group they're in. Is that correct?
Yeah. After I ask them all of the baseline questions and things like that, that's like the last thing that happens. If that makes sense. I'm sorry. Am I answering the question?
Sort of. So if you were like evaluating this trial, like doing critical appraisal, you'd say it's actually not masked for the outcome assessors, which is you, are not masked. Is that?
Yes, I would. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Morgan, for the STEPS trial, did you notice any difference in follow-up in terms of retention between the two groups, given that one was just augmented regular care?
So we haven't done it yet. It doesn't start until March 29th, but
Okay.
I'm not too sure. I'm looking forward to that as well. I'm interested to see if this is going to make a difference.
Did they do any pilot?
No, this is all brand new. It was supposed to start in October, but they've had a lot of delays with it. So yeah, it's kind of a shame. I don't know.
Any other questions?
Yeah, hi. Really impressive experience from both of you. It seems like you've had many careers already. I was just curious with this STEPS trial and the telephone interviewing. Are you actually doing it on the telephone, or are you using Zoom or FaceTime?
So it's through a telephone, and basically they're sending us all telephones. So when I call a patient, it's not going to say my name or anything. It'll be Duke Health, Geisinger Health, or UMMC. So yeah, they're actually sending us all individual phones just for this project. So it won't be over video either. It's just through those cell phones.
Morgan, excellent talk. Just a quick question for you. Have you thought about ways in which you can use some of your undergraduate education in exercise science and kind of meld that with your work in clinical trials and epi?
Yeah, I have. I'm still, I don't know, I guess thinking about it. It is kind of a big switch because I wanted to do physical therapy, but I also played a sport in undergrad, so that's why I'm very drawn to that, and I really did enjoy my undergrad degree, but I haven't. I'm not too sure yet. No, I'm still like very open to different ideas and things, but yeah, I'm not too sure.
I think there probably are lots of great opportunities in this. You'll discover them over time, but I think it's a very interesting and unique background that you have.
Thank you.
Any lingering questions for either Morgan or Jasmine? Great job. Great presentation. It's nice to see you both progressing in your program and in your area of study. If you have any questions, of course, all of us faculty are here to talk as well. So
Thank you so much.
everyone, enjoy your spring break. Good luck on finals.
Thank you.
Thank you both.